Good evening and welcome to our program. Tonight's topic asks how much we should pay our public school teachers, with a special focus on teachers in the New York City suburbs like Long Island. School taxes comprise about 60% of suburban property taxes, and teacher compensation makes up the largest part of a school district's budget. And so teacher salaries are a major factor affecting our school property taxes. Our guests tonight are Michael Andrews and Frank Russo. Mr. Andrews has been a high school history teacher for over 17 years, teaching in 2 private schools and 3 public schools. The father of 2, Michael is now in his 11th year at Cold Spring Harbor High School, where he teaches both advanced placement European history and world history. Michael has a master's in modern world history from St. John's University in New York City. Frank Russo is a former division manager of Verizon Corporation and is president of the Port Washington Educational Assembly. Frank has 7 children and 21 grandchildren, also has 5 teachers in his immediate family, and is a founding member of LIFER, Long Islanders for Educational Reform, a Long Island group concerned about excessive school costs and taxes. Frank also has an electrical engineering degree from Manhattan College and an MBA from Baruch. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And my co-host, Mike Mohall.
Thank you, Patty. My first question would be towards you, Frank. Shouldn't a Long Island or a Westchester teacher be able to afford a home for his or her family?
The answer is obviously yes, absolutely. But I would also say so should the custodians in the school. So should the school secretaries. So should the people who work in any supermarket or any service station. Everyone, from a moral standpoint, we'd like everyone to be able to afford a home in Long Island or Westchester or any of the suburbs of New York State. The question has to do with affordability, which is a function of income, and that's at the topic of today's program. My basic theme, my basic argument, my fundamental argument is that the salary of a teacher, just as the salary of a secretary, custodian, anyone else, should be a function of what the market requires to get a competent person to do a quality job. The market should determine it. That's the simple answer that I give.
Michael?
Well, what we have to think about is teacher quality. The typical teacher will be forced to get a master's degree or higher in New York State, basically making a $30,000 investment. If you told the typical college graduate, we'll start you in the $40,000 range, but within the next few years you must get a master's degree, you must get it completely reimbursed out of your own pocket. If you look at the market, basically corporations, actually according to just a couple of months ago, Money Magazine, it was somewhere in the 60th percentile of American corporations actually pay some or even full tuition reimbursement if it is job related, if it is job required. That is not done currently in the public school system, generally speaking. Many teachers will typically not make the much talked about $100,000 salaries until they've earned 2, 3 master's degrees or a doctorate and worked as much as 20 years. If you told most professionals, as much as I want all people to be able to afford a home, if you told most professionals, doctors, lawyers, stockbrokers, if you said to accountants, if you said to pharmaceutical salespeople, people who are your veterinarian, people who basically do dental hygiene, if you said, look, no matter how talented you are, no matter how hard you work, you have to wait basically 20 years to even begin to afford a home in Long Island, where the average home price is $410,000, which is 13% higher than in Queens, which is double the national average. And if you make $100,000, you're talking about basically half, even if you paid no property tax, about half of your income would go to housing. It doesn't seem unreasonable that teachers are compensated at their current levels. If anything, when they manage about 120 teenage quote-unquote employees, they're grossly undercompensated.
I have some other comments on that, then we'll let Michael react to my comments. The average salary for a Long Island teacher is about $80,000 now, not counting the money they get for the field trips or photography club or whatever. That might bring it to about $85,000 average salary for working 36 weeks a year. Again, to me, quality also is a good aspect. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. Since they have tenure, the best teacher doesn't get paid more than the worst teacher. Worst teacher gets as much as the best teacher. I'm all for quality. The big factor is what do we need to pay to get quality teachers? And in Long Island, and few people are aware of this, few people are aware that most teachers are making over $80,000. But in addition, and it's been like this for 35 years, we have over 100 applicants, between 100 and 200 applicants per teacher position in Long Island and Westchester. It's been like this since 1970, before 1970, hasn't changed. The market is strongly suggesting to us that we don't have to pay these salaries to attract quality teachers. It's more now who you know to get a job than it is quality, because they're swamped with applications, and unless you have a connection, half the time that's how you're getting a job, because someone is putting in the good word for you.
That's a good point. Did you want to respond
Well,
to that?
I teach at Cold Spring Harbor High School, and I'm proud to teach there. And Newsweek considers this the top 16 school districts in the nation. And I have to tell you, we do hire quality people. We do get many applications. But I was actually on the Social Studies Hiring Committee, and many of the applications we received were people who had basically either no certification, who had majored in subjects outside of subject area, who were really not particularly trained, not particularly personable or vocal necessarily, and we would weed out through many of them to get the best people. If you look at New York State in terms of the quality of education, according to Newsweek, I believe it was 2005, 144 of the top high schools in the entire nation actually reside in New York. In terms of the top 100 school districts, I believe it was something like the top 14 were actually in New York State. This is in all across America. If you look at pension benefits, which I know we're probably going to get to later, we're actually behind Alaska, Colorado, Connecticut, and New Jersey. In terms of average teacher salaries being paid like $80,000, that's considering a merging of the people who are in the twilight of their careers with the rookies. The average starting salary, again, in Nassau County, which is the 6th wealthiest county in the nation, 2nd wealthiest county in New York State, the average teacher salary is basically in the $40,000 range. If you get a master's, right in the middle, the median, by the same guidebook that Mr. Russo had referred me to, the BOCES Nassau Suffolk County Handbook, I think right in the middle, the median salary was $55,000. Now, granted, benefits do play an equation, or a factoring in terms of what teachers are compensated with. But if you want quality people in education, top students in their field, again, ask the average student fresh out of college, settle to basically have in the $40,000 range in Long Island, wait 20 years to possibly be able to afford a home for you and your family, and take on as much indebtedness, possibly more than the typical attorney or doctor. It's quite a lot of demands when you consider this financially. One other thing, if you look at the Yeshiva University website, the average starting salary for a lawyer in the New York City metropolitan area is $94,000. At the top law firms, if you're a top student, you're looking first year salary, not including benefits. First year, $135,000. A teacher, even in his last year, after almost 40 years of service, wouldn't aspire to make that much money.
Well, my follow-up to that would be then how should we view fringe benefits in terms of being reasonable, such as an example would be COLAs, cost of living adjustments that are found in pensions. Should overtime or extra assignments be included in determining those pensions?
Okay, I'm going to answer first. Okay. In terms of cost of living, if you consider pensions, a few things. The New York State teachers' pension system is actually, much of it is self-funded. For the first 10 years, if you're a Tier 4 teacher, as most teachers are, you're basically looking at contributing mandatorily 3% of your salary towards that. If you are a 20-year veteran, after 20 years of service, if you retire, all you get is 30%, hardly enough to live on. We don't want to enronize the pensions that the New York State teachers have. In terms of cost of living is reasonable for really every senior on Social Security, every veteran, and you usually don't quibble about these things. If they want to go after the pensions, especially when teachers usually have to delay 20 years to make a competitive salary in terms of competitive to other similarly educated professionals, then I think we should be paying them far more to compensate that.
Right.
Okay, and I'm going to correct Michael on the average teacher salary, because again, I've been a student of this for 35 years. It is $80,000 in Long Island. The starting salary in Port Washington for a bachelor's only is $49,000 now. For a master's, it's in the $57,000, $58,000 starting salary, step one, first year. Again, it's the market. If you can get a lawyer at $135,000, if you can get that salary, that's pretty darn good. Most lawyers do not start at that. Cost of living adjustments. No one in private employment that I'm aware of gets a cost of living adjustment in his or her pension. It's not simply not done. It's done for government employees, teachers, state, county, town workers. Only public employees get these cost of living adjustments. Blatantly unfair. Now, when did they start it? They started these cost of living adjustment COLAs back at a time 50 years ago when the salaries for these teachers and public employees were pretty low. But what's happened in the past 35, 40 years, since the 60s when the union was established, Michael, salaries started going through the roof through the threats of these illegal strikes and slowdowns, and we're not going to give the kid the reference letter he wants for college and so forth. And with all of that, the salaries started going through the roof, but they never adjusted the benefits. So teachers are getting cost of living adjustments and pensions when nobody else is getting them in private industry. Look at the health insurance. They're getting health insurance premiums paid typically across Long Island 90%. We just negotiated the teachers paying finally 20% in Port Washington. Most teachers in Long Island, from the BOCES data, they pay about 10%. Private employees pay much, much more than that. We've got to increase the contributions from public employees, including teachers, well beyond the 10-20% point for the health insurance, which is bankrupting school districts. The cost of living adjustment should be reduced. Another factor, when you compute a pension for a public employee, teachers, any other public employee, if they work overtime, if they do some extra courses, photography club, football stuff, they put all that in the compensation that they calculate the pension on. We never did that at Verizon, and no private company does that. We look at your basic salary, and we don't even look at your last 3 years' salary. What Verizon did, they went back 5 years and averaged the 5 years before that. So private employee companies, first of all, we know they're all surrendering their defined benefit plans. Verizon has abandoned defined benefit plans. So has General Motors, Motorola, IBM. Only the government employees are still getting these defined benefit pensions. If we're going to enable people to survive and answer the first question that Michael put to us, that he suggested we ask about, should they be able to afford a house? If we want anyone to be able to afford a house in Long Island or Westchester, we've got to start addressing these ridiculous fringe benefits that public employees get. Whether it's, and I love, policemen, I've got policemen in the family, policemen, teachers, all public employees, we've got to start addressing these absurd pension benefits, health benefits, the way they compute the pensions. These are absurd benefits. And we all want quality teachers, but don't forget, teachers are not paid based on their quality. The worst teacher gets as much as the best teacher. Why? Because the unions won't have it any other way.
Well, you raise a very good point, Frank, but believe it or not, we're at the midway point of our program, so we're going to take a quick break now for a public service announcement.
My hero hasn't traveled the world, doesn't star on her own TV show, can't sing very well. My hero didn't plan on being pregnant, put her career on hold, chose to have him love me. My hero, my mom.
If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, learn more today about parenting or adoption. While there are unwanted pregnancies, there are no unwanted children.
My hero isn't able to slam dunk. Doesn't make $1 million a year. Can't rap at all. My hero helped my mom when she was pregnant. Takes care of us. Chose to have and love me. My hero, my dad.
If you're facing an unplanned pregnancy, learn more today about parenting or adoption. While there are unwanted pregnancies, there are no unwanted children.
Welcome back to our program. Let's move on. Michael, I wanted to get to the issue of teachers' performance. How would you answer the question, should the poorest performing teachers be paid as much as the best performing teachers? And should our tenure policy be changed, be made renewable every 5 years rather than being permanent?
Well, I'd have to say a few things. We have to consider, first of all, the children are basically not widgets in a factory. Kids are individuals. Some of them are dealing with special education issues. Some of them are products of a divorced family recently. And everyone's going to be performing, at least at the beginning, at a different level. And teachers get a whole myriad of individual situations that they want to address. In terms of performance, that's accordingly a very, very hard thing to measure. In my district, arguably according to every possible indicator, Regents scores, AP scores, we're one of the finest. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to pay us far more or bonuses. What I think in terms of performance-based salaries, often that's a ruse to basically pay teachers less. Because if a teacher is given students who can barely speak English in some places, students who have many remedial needs, students who have disabilities, probably they're not going to perform on a test, no matter how hard that teacher works, no matter how brilliant, no matter how educated, as a teacher who's given much more high-performing students. Somewhat similar to a jockey, you could say. You could have the world's best jockey, put him on an old broken-down horse. Not that I want to compare kids to horses, but he's probably not going to win the race as much as someone who's given a thoroughbred. In terms of renewable tenure, what we have to realize about tenure is it's not basically an excuse for bad performance. A good administrator can get rid of a bad teacher in New York State. Whether or not they want to, whether or not they want to spend the time doing it, that's another story. Perhaps they should look into that. But really, if you survive the screening process of 3 years, where typically you're observed by many different people many different times throughout the year, I think basically you're going to generally, at least at the better schools, get good teachers. In terms of, I'm trying to think, what was the other part of your question? Did I address all that?
Well, yeah, I think you did the performance
Yeah,
of the teachers and the issue of tenure. Do you want to
Okay,
jump
yeah,
in here,
I'd
Frank?
like to sure respond. And I agree with Michael, children are not widgets. But I'm not sure how he answered the question about pay for performance. I didn't really get an answer. I think he's saying basically it's hard to do. And it is hard to do. I was a division manager at Verizon. If I had 30 people working for me, I had to evaluate their performance and so forth and decide who's going to get 8% and who's going to get 0%. And who's going to be promoted. There is an unfairness. It's not 100% fair. But on balance, in my 30 years with the Bell system, most of it was fair. 90% of it was fair. And what I can also say, 99% of the people were motivated to work harder because they knew that performance affected their salary. For teachers, the worst performer, and everyone, Michael knows this, I'm sure he doesn't want to embarrass people in his own school district, but I've heard this 100 times from parents. Certain teachers are superb, certain teachers are so-so, pretty good, not fantastic, and other teachers are pretty poor. But the problem with our compensation system, because of the teacher unions, is that the poorest teacher, by law, by contract, must get as much as the best teacher. It's a disgrace. Yes, it would be hard to do. How would we do it? I would say at the lower grades, I'm not going to ask the opinions of the students. I would ask the opinions of the mothers, the fathers, the principal, assistant principal, if there is one, other teachers. If it's a middle grade, I'd start getting a little bit input from some of the students and the parents and other teachers and the principals. Higher grades, I'd rely more on the students. In high school, I'd rely a lot on the students. And I'd want to make sure that he's not taking out on a teacher because the teacher was being tough on him, he was grading him fairly. So you've got to do this very carefully, but by and large, you could do it. And if you look at test results, if you have a class that's still coming in and it's fairly low on certain measurements, NAEP tests or whatever they are.
Reading scores.
Reading scores, you see how they improve. You measure the improvement. It could be done. We've got to start compensating teachers, and the way to do that is through some competition. In the other case of tenure, we've got a teacher in our community in Port Washington who's been indicted for stealing $2,500. This teacher is being put in some little job. I don't know if she's guilty or not. It was double time on overtime kind of a thing, $2,500. But the point is, we've got to pay a replacement, $80,000 with benefits, to replace that teacher. We cannot suspend that teacher with pay. And we've got to pay the suspended teacher her full pay, her full salary. Nobody in private industry does it this way.
That is unbelievable.
Now, and I would agree also, if she's found innocent, because someone made false, whatever, found innocent,
Mistake.
then I would say then pay her back for the time we suspended her. But why should a teacher be suspended for stealing, and we have to pay her $80,000 if it takes a year? If it takes 2 years, we'll have to pay her $160,000 or $200,000 by that time with the increases. In New York City, we saw in Stupid in America, John Stossel's special on ABC TV, there are over 100 teachers, maybe between 100 and 200 teachers in New York City in what they call rubber rooms. They did poor performance, or more typically molestation of children, abuse, sending sexual emails to students. We cannot fire them. They're these rubber rooms, they call them. We're spending, according to Stossel, according to Joel Klein, superintendent of schools in the city, $300,000 we have to pay in their salaries and legal fees to get rid of them. It's not easy to get rid of a bad teacher because of these archaic tenure laws. I don't want a teacher fired for wrong reasons, and I want to protect against that, but we can't even suspend a teacher
The most
when she's
extreme
indicted.
examples.
It's a disgrace. It's
All right,
a disgrace.
let's go to another question, and Michael, I'll ask you first. Should teachers with as much or more education as another teacher receive the same salary and benefit package comparable to other professionals?
Well, I think it's only reasonable that educational attainments should form a major part of the compensation package. Again, it does for accountants, it does for lawyers. Certainly neurosurgeons make more than general practitioners, and I'm not expecting to be paid like a medical doctor, but I think that there should be at least an increase based on educational attainments. If you consider somebody like myself going for a doctorate, I'll stand to make about $1,500 to $2,000 more than I'm making currently once I complete my dissertation, after having given up the entire summer, about 12 hours a day, to work on that dissertation. Most summers, typically I'm doing curriculum development. That was one summer that I didn't. Mostly the curriculum development is uncompensated. I just do want to address one thing that Frank had mentioned, because I think two things are being conflated, and then I realize we have to move on. If you look at the New York City public school system, generally you don't have teachers who are making an average of $80,000. And again, Port Washington's one of the finest districts. You said they start at 49. That's actually rather high for many districts. They tend to not have those problems typically at Port Washington. If you have that kind of teacher, an unfortunate situation, it's rare. Generally, if New York City were paying more, and they have increased their salary a little bit, perhaps you wouldn't have 1 in 3 teachers, I believe, actually leaving teaching within the first few years. You wouldn't have basically only poor quality people maybe looking for a cushy job staying in some of those teacher classrooms. Some New York City teachers, some of the finest around. But you're not going to get a consistent quality if we don't pay them what they're worth.
And by the way, I want to compliment Mike. I know he's a solid, fine teacher. The students in Cold Spring Harbor are lucky to have you, Michael, and I thank him for taking the time to come on. There's another fine teacher in Port Washington. She wrote letters criticizing me 3 times, but I checked her. She's a good teacher, good English teacher in Schreiber. Ann Pellette, her name is. She got up at one of our forums in the library, made the same point Michael was making. There are these lawyers and doctors that are making so much, and some of them are not too good, she said. Apparently her father was sick, and she wasn't happy with the doctors and the lawyers. But the point is, if you're not happy with that doctor or that lawyer, you don't deal with them anymore, and you tell your friends and your neighbors, and that doctor or lawyer is gone in terms of being a successful doctor or lawyer.
Reputation.
With teachers, we can't do that. But I'd like to get on, if we can get to the next question. I don't want to delay more on this one.
Well, my question would be, and I'll direct it to you, Michael, is should parents be free to choose whatever accredited school, public or private, that they desire for their children and be given their fair share of the educational tax dollars to do that?
Well, I believe to a point that they should, and I'll say why I'm nuancing the answer. I don't think parents should suffer the penalty of double taxation. If a parent is paying several $1,000s a year towards property taxes being directed to the local school district, and they find that it's a poor school district, they'd like to look elsewhere, I think it's reasonable that they should be able to get, say, a voucher of $3,000 to $4,000 to reapply towards the education of their children, to defray some of the costs. However, we have to realize that to be free and fair competition, we have to really have an equal playing field. It's not fair to, say, compare a quality Catholic school that has, say, 42 kids in a class, does not accept special education students, does not have a licensed psychologist and social worker on staff, does not necessarily have certified teachers, has only a small core who actually have master's or advanced degrees, and then say that they don't have to take regents and they have no AP classes and few electives, and they don't have Title IX requirements in terms of equivalency for female and male playing fields, to say, well, you know, of course, our costs are less. It'd be kind of like a hospital that only takes healthy people and is staffed by nurses, and they say, look, our medical results are great, and our costs are low. So I agree with Frank that vouchers are a possible solution, tax credits are a possible solution, but at the same time, we can't bankrupt the public system.
And I agree. I'm in agreement with Michael on this. I might differ a little bit in terms of the amount of the voucher or scholarship or tax credit. If we're spending on Long Island now about $20,000 per pupil, I would like to see in Long Island vouchers in the order of maybe half that, let's say. In which case, maybe even less than half, because special ed, I'd want to give full amount for whatever special ed requires. And as Michael said, I'd agree they ought to get whatever the full amount should be for special ed requirements. But for a non-special ed student, make it at least 40% of the full cost of a public school education. $8,000, $7,000 for elementary, $10,000 for high school, averages out to $8,000. 1/3 of the kids are in high school. That would be a very fair system. And I'd want the parents to obviously have access to an evaluation so they can know how their kids are doing relative to the kids in competing schools. This was the basic point that John Stossel made on that Stupid in America special, which was one of their most phenomenal successes on ABC. The point was we need competition. Education in this country is the last unnatural monopoly. It's the only one that's left in this country. I worked for a company that was an unnatural monopoly in the 70s. They tried to get me to do studies to show why we didn't need competition in telecommunications. We do need them. And the customers benefited. The consumer, which is the student and the parent, will benefit with a competing school system. We need to give choice to parents so that they can pick the school that reaffirms their values and that meets their requirements. Today we don't have it, and we've got to deal with the poor kids just as well, give them a fair amount as well. So choice in education is the one thing that will improve quality, lower everybody's property taxes, and enable moral values to be instilled in the children according to the wishes of the parents.
We only have a couple of minutes left in our program, and I'll direct it to you first, Frank. But our quality teachers are a major reason why New York State students rank so high on AP exams.
Yeah, Michael mentioned that before about where New York placed. Now, I have to create my image is slightly different. New York, on all standardized tests, see, the top kids do very well with the AP. The bottom kids with special needs to get their attention focused on. But the middle 70 to 80% do not. And the NAEP tests show we fall in the middle of the 50 states in the nation. We're about 20th to 25th, year after year, in spite of spending more than 48 of the 50 states. So money is not the problem in New York.
And Michael, 30 seconds or less, if
Sure,
you could comment.
I'm glad Frank mentioned that. I teach about 60 to 70% annually of the sophomore division at Cold Spring Harbor High School, and the vast majority of my kids get threes, basically a passing grade on the AP exam. I'm sorry, not threes. Threes or above, threes, fours, and fives. And I think it's due to quality education, not just by me, but by fellow staff members as well.
Well, I want to thank both of our guests, Michael Andrews and Frank Russo, for a very lively discussion. Obviously, we could keep talking here for several hours. We'd like to have you both back again. And thank you to our viewers for watching, and we hope to see you again next week. Thank you for staying tuned.
If you were born after 1973, about 30% of your friends and relatives are missing. Since the Supreme Court approved legal abortions 30 years ago, nearly 1 of every 3 babies was aborted. That means 43 million U.S. children, teens, and young adults are missing. While we know how all of them disappeared, we will never know what they had to offer. Life. See what we've been missing.
Over the years, humanity has made terrible mistakes. People were treated as less than human, even killed, because they were a different skin color, because they were a different faith, because they were unplanned, unknown, and helpless. But over time, we are slowly learning that we are all God's children, created in His image, and to disregard the value of human life, whether through hate or indifference, is wrong. That all human creation, regardless of race, religion, abilities, or stage of human life, has an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, a right to love and be loved. As Americans, let's cherish the sanctity of life, because we know how it feels when others treat us as less than human.
This program was brought to you by the American Family Association of New York. For information on school reform, contact Long Island for Educational Reform, LIFER, www.blissschooltax.com. You could reach them by telephone at 800-833-2250. If you'd like to receive AFA's free newsletter, write us at P.O. Box 203, Port Washington, New York, 11050, or call us at 516-944-3544. Our newsletter and TV schedule are on our website at www.afany.org. Your comments are welcome, and thanks for being with us.